We are going to start today's video where we left off on part 2 of our Cerbo series, just post firmware update. It's important if you're going to be watching this video going forward that your firmware is updated past version 3.5. Otherwise, a lot of what we discuss and a lot of the things you see won't match what you see on your Cerbo. Down in the description there will be links for our Cerbo part 1 video where we cover connections, the changes from Mark 1 to Mark 2 generations, and a general overview of the Cerbo, as well as in our Cerbo Part 2 video, we cover the initial powering up, the communications, and updating the firmware to get us to this point where we're ready for Part 3. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and turn on the new user display Victron has launched in these newer firmware versions. So from our firmware screen, or if we're from our device list, we're going to go ahead and go into the settings. We're then going to scroll down here to our display and language tab. And you'll see here in the bottom of our display and language, if not already turned on, we'll have the ability to adjust or choose which interface we use here. And this is going to be regardless of the way you're viewing the system, whether you're doing it through remote console like I am here, or through the GX Touch 5-inch or 7-inch touchscreens. This interface kind of carries over across those interfaces. Once we go ahead and click on this user interface tab, we can see we have an option here for our classic UI, which is what we're seeing now, as well as our new user interface. So we're going to go ahead and select that and hit OK. You'll find now that the Cerbo is going to have to reboot. Once it reboots, we'll pick this up. After rebooting, you'll be greeted with quite a bit of a different looking display here. We should load in here on this overview page, kind of similar to the previous user interface where we get kind of basic information about what's going on with the system. This has obviously been changed a bit to be more circular, where we can display a lot more information on this overview or home screen, or they call it the brief. I guess here what they call the overview is going to be very similar in a flowchart to what was originally in the first user interface, where we're kind of seeing these bubbles and flow of current going on in the system. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. It just is somewhat of user preference depending on what data you want to see, but obviously you can switch between these at any point. Looking down here at the bottom, we'll kind of go through the new UI first and then into the initial settings that we want to adjust and look at when we're commissioning a system. So again, here we're starting off on the brief. You can see up in the upper left-hand corner we have this new toggle icon, very similar to what you find on the VRM portal, where we have some quick access to some inverter configuration, to our short current level and our on and off state, inverter only, charger only, that kind of stuff, as well as we'll have quick access to our relays and generator control from this tab. So a nice quick access tab here now that they've added in the new UI. And then on the other side here, we can kind of change the way that this brief screen is laid out. So we got a couple options here on the physical or visual layout of this brief. We move down here to the overview screen. Same kind of situation. We have the same toggle icon up here that we can quick access some information and some settings on our inverter and our generator/relays. Also, nice thing here in this overview screen now is we can jump directly to devices by clicking on the specific bubble. So if I want to get more details on what's going on with my solar, I can click here on the solar bubble and we jump directly to our smart solar controller in this case. In the same fashion, I can click here on the battery and get some information from our shunt directly. So that's a very nice quality of life feature that they've added in this new UI. I tend to use this a lot. It's a nice shortcut from this screen directly to the device I'm curious about. Moving on now to this levels tab. This gives us kind of a visual of any of our tank levels, whether they be water or gas or fuel. All those kind of things will show up here. Also, we have a tab for our environmentals. These are typically our temperature, pressure, humidity sensors like RUVI sensors. We'll have all of these listed and displayed here. We have the same kind of notification tab for alarms and warnings and stuff like that. If we have any active alarms, we can clear them from here, or any notifications, they'll pop up in here. If we move along here to the settings, this is where you'll see a kind of a big difference. Initially on the first UI, our device list was the first screen when going into the menu that you saw. Now the device list is in the settings, so to get to our specific devices, go directly here into our device list, and this will be basically identical to the first UI version where you can click on a specific device, get more information, program it, do what you need to do. And again, we can also do a quick jump from this overview screen if we want to go to a specific device in that device list. Moving on from there, we're going to go through these menu settings one at a time, starting here with the general. We're not necessarily going to go through all the settings and what each one is. We're just going to highlight the most important for the initial setup and programming of the Cerbo. Really here in the general tab, the most important feature or function to see is probably this reboot. That's probably utilized the most out of anything in this menu. For the most part, the default settings for access level and security and all of these other settings are perfectly fine. But I will mention this reboot in case we ever needed to do a full Cerbo reboot. This is the easiest way to do it, with the exception of powering down the Cerbo completely. From the General tab, we'll move here into the Firmware tab, which we've already visited and talked about in Cerbo Part 2. And there's nothing much more here to do other than occasionally check for updates if you don't have it set to auto update, which you might as well do, check and update automatically, or you could check manually and update manually if needed. Beyond the firmware, we're going to want to make a stop here on our date and time section and make sure that our time zone is set appropriately for our location. So here in our case, we're going to make sure we're in America, and again, in our specific case, we're in Pacific Standard Time, so we're going to make sure that that's selected. If you don't properly set the time zone, you'll get some weird mismatches between time locally and time on the VRM, so this is a good thing to just make sure is set right out of the gate. Moving along here, we have our System Setup tab. This does contain a couple important things we need to look at when first commissioning or setting up our system. First thing up here is we can obviously set a custom name for this system if we choose. And then down below that here on AC Input 1, we're going to define what these connections are. So in this case here on this system, we're running a multi-plus inverter, which only has a single AC input. So we're going to go ahead and click on that and make sure we tell the system essentially what the power is coming into that input. So in this case, it's a grid connection. We can also select generator or a shore power connection for a more generic option. If you have a quattro inverter, you would come in here and also define what that AC input 2 was, or what the source is here. Moving down from there, we also have the ability to choose the position of the AC loads. Usually by default, the default setting here of AC input and output is fine, but you do have that ability. Below that, we do have this monitor for grid failure. This here can be valuable if in fact you wanted to monitor for loss of AC input. So if you are in fact monitoring grid or some other always-on source, you can have the inverter system and the Cerbo notify you if that source disappears. From there, we also have the ability here of adjusting our battery monitor selection. If you have more than one device in the system that can display state of charge, you can set it manually based on preference. By default, it's set to automatic, and typically that's fine, but in large systems, maybe we have multiple shunts, we can select manually which device is providing that data. And you can see here, because we have that automatic, it does define here the selected device currently that we're using, in our case, a link shunt. This slider here, has DC system, is quite an interesting data point to turn on. It really just provides a little additional end user data. So when this slider is active and we bounce out here to our overview screen, we will see this DC load bubble. So this gives us a little bit of extra vision on what the system can account for. So if we have any battery direct loads, or in the case of standby power, power that's not being accounted for, it will display here in this DC load bubble. And then below this DC system slider, we have this battery measurements selection. And this will allow us to choose which device is displaying on the VRM portal for that state of charge. Backing out of system setup, we're going to go ahead and move down. Below system setup, we have a function called DVCC, that's distributed voltage and current control. This is a little bit more of an advanced feature that I won't go into completely, but essentially it allows you to set system-wide voltage and current rules or limits for battery charging and other things. Down below our DVCC, we have our display and language tab. We have the ability here in our display mode, just like on a lot of cell phones and browsers, to choose a light or a dark theme to our display. Below that, we have the brief levels. So this is that brief screen that we have here down below. And this allows us to define which data points are present here within these circles. So you can see here, level 1, we have battery, fuel, and we can turn on different devices for additional concentric rings around on that display. Here we have our language selection, just exactly what it sounds like. We do want to check here in units for most setups. We do want to make some adjustment here, especially if you're in America. We do have here the ability to decide how we want our power measurements to be displayed, whether you want the traditional watts or if you want amps and current, if that's your preference. Whether we want our temperature displayed in Celsius or Fahrenheit, and our volume in terms of tank level measurements, in what measurement are we looking to use. Below the units measurement, we have the ability now to adjust the max and min of our gauge ranges. Typically the auto ranging is what we'll set it on and leave it, but we do have the ability to customize that. Below that, we have our start page function. Again, this is just defining where do we start, some timeout stuff, just basic display things. And then again, as we talked about earlier, selecting our user interface. Below our display and language, here we come into our VRM Online Portal tab. And we do have some good information here that we want to look at, as well as some settings we may want to adjust. So you can see up at the top here, we have a selection now for our VRM portal, and if we're transmitting or what we're doing, if we're sending any data or not, we can kind of lock that down a little bit more. We have our VRM portal ID number. This log interval is an important consideration depending on use case and internet connection for that matter. If you have limited data or not, this may be something to look at, or if you want your system log more real time, this would be something to look at. I think the default is 15 minutes. I generally come in here and set this to 1 minute. I like that data coming into the advanced tab of the VRM to be as real time as it can. So unless you have restrictions on data, generally I'm going to set this to 1 minute. You can see here below that if you're using a secure connection or not, and then when's the last time it transmitted to the portal. So you can see the last time, 30 seconds ago, it sent data to the VRM. Here's your connection status. This reboot with no contact, I think, is another valuable feature to talk about. I've seen quite a few times where certain types of internet services, and specifically, mostly I've seen this with Starlink, where we'll have a satellite dropout, and for whatever reason, the Cerbo doesn't reconnect to the Starlink or internet, the Wi-Fi connection. So to solve that problem, what I generally will do here is turn on this setting for reboot when no contact and set a time frame of maybe 20 minutes. And that essentially allows that after 20 minutes, if the Cerbo does not transmit or see the internet, it's going to reboot itself. It's going to do a complete reboot. And generally when the Cerbo reboots, for whatever reason, it has no problem reconnecting to that Wi-Fi. So I do think this is an important setting to mention, especially if you have Starlink and if you're experiencing any service dropouts. This is very helpful in solving that issue. Below that, we have our storage location. This is where, if we're not connected to the VRM, where is it logging data? The Cerbo does have some internal storage where it can record, several days, a couple days of data. But you can also insert an SD card or a thumb drive into one of the USB ports, and you'll see here that if that was present, would show up here and would automatically start logging that data to the external drive or to the SD card as opposed to the internal storage. Below the VRM portal, we have ESS. ESS isn't something we're utilizing in America. Generally, ESS requires a grid sellback connection, and the inverters in America are not able to do sellback. So ESS isn't generally something we're looking at here in America. Below that, we have our energy meters. This would be if we have any external energy meters, they would show up here. Same thing here if we had any AC coupling or PV string inverters that are AC coupled into this system. If they were communicating with the Cerbo, they would be present here. Moving along, again, these are some more communication protocols for more obscure communications for Modbus TCP devices. Again, very rarely used. Below that, we have our Ethernet tab. So if we have any hard-connected network or internet directly into the Ethernet port on the Cerbo, the state, the IP address, all that stuff would show up here. And then as well in the Wi-Fi tab, when you're connected to an access point and you want to make connection or you want to disable this access point, this is where you're going to do that from. Below the Wi-Fi tab, we have a GSM modem tab. GSM modem tab is only going to be utilized if you have a 4G LTE USB modem that's attached to the Cerbo. Then you'll have some general information in here about status of the network, if it's connected, disconnect, things like that. Below the GSM modem, we have a GPS function, and this again would be for an external GPS antenna. That GPS antenna can either be a USB GPS antenna directly into the Cerbo, or it can be a GSM modem GPS antenna that's connected directly to the 4G LTE modem. So either of those work and provide location data for geofencing and other things. Below the GPS tab, we have the Bluetooth tab. This is just a on and off for the transmission of the Cerbo's Bluetooth. So you can see it's on, and we do have that pin code enabled. So below the Bluetooth here, you can see we have a generator start-stop tab and a tank pump tab. So when we click on these initially, you can see that they're disabled. But going here into the relay tab, we have now the option of setting or defining the function of relay number 1. If we define relay number 1 as a gen start stop and we back out of here, we'll now have options available under this generator start stop tab to program stop start conditions for our generator, or when the relay number 1 latches and unlatches. And then the same if we take this relay and we put it to a tank pump setting, we'll find now that the tank pump tab is active and has the ability to be programmed for, again, on-off states of the relay. Relay number 2's functionality is quite a bit more limited as opposed to relay number 1. You can see with relay number 2, really we just have 2 options. It's either manual or it's temperature defined by one of the temperature sensors in the system. Below our relay tab, we have our services tab. In the services tab, we can get some live information about what's going on with some of our inputs, like our CAN bus, and if we want to enable Modbus. This isn't very commonly used unless we're trying to troubleshoot something. Below the services tab, we have this I/O tab. Inside of this I/O tab, we can turn on and off different inputs on the Cerbo. These include the analog inputs like tank level and temperature levels, as well as the digital inputs and the Bluetooth sensor inputs. And this is where we'll also add or remove those specific devices. So like as you can see here in the case of Bluetooth sensors, once I go into this tab and the Cerbo detects that there's an available sensor, I'll have it here with a closed toggle. Once I turn that toggle on, this device will now show up in our device list and will be able to be programmed and modified. Same thing here, if I'm adding a temperature sensor, a hardwired temperature sensor into the Cerbo, I would select the temperature input that sensor is located. It's not going to be visible until I enable that input. So if you have a temperature sensor or some other device connected and you're not seeing it, whether it be a tank level, resistive tank level, or temperature, make sure it is enabled, and the same with our Bluetooth sensors. Last but not least, here in our settings is our VRM device instances. Again, this isn't probably something that's utilized very much, but it does give the VRM instance or device number for each thing in the system. If you have any other additional questions, feel free to leave those in the comment section below. We do read and respond to all comments. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.
Backwoods Solar is America's oldest and most trusted solar retailer with nearly 50 years of experience. Head over to our website, backwoodsolar.com, to get a free copy of our planning guide. While you're there, check out our Learning Center with articles on setup, sizing, tax credits, and so much more helpful information, especially if you're just getting started with solar. There are also links provided in the description.